Although the city of Vienna was long the capital of the Holy Roman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, the Austrian people are most proud of the fact that Vienna is called the City of Music. The city lies in the northeastern corner of the country, 50 kilometers from the Hungarian and Czech borders. The friendly, hospitable people of Vienna are glad to engage in conversation with foreigners at a table in a Heuriger, with a typical sramli accordion in the background, something which is still in fashion, just like the famous Viennese waltz. There are large music events in the city, like the New Year's concert, the Opera Ball, and the Vienna Festival. The music of Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, and Schubert is still alive in the hearts of the Austrians, as well as the operettas of Imre Kallmann and Ferenc Lehár, or the immortal melodies of the Strauss family. The statue of Johann Strauss the Younger, who was called the Waltz King, plays the fiddle among the trees of the Stadtpark. The musician is surrounded by dreamlike figures on the masterpiece by Edmund Helmer. All three sons of Johann Strauss, who was born in 1804, followed in their father's footsteps. Together, they became the nobility of Viennese music. The magnificent building of the Vienna State Opera was built based on the award-winning design of Eduard von Danube and August von Sichardsburg at the end of the 19th century. The romantic building mixes the elements of the Venetian and French Gothic styles, as well as Florentine Renaissance and Classicism. The opera opened its doors to the public with Mozart's Don Giovanni in 1869. The artistic fountains make Albertinaplatz even more beautiful. The wall is ornamented by classicist pillars and chambers. The work of Moritz von Löhr and Johann Meixner features allegories symbolizing the Danube. After World War II, only the four most important statues were renovated. One can easily meet people on the street wearing old wigs and clothes from the time of Mozart in Vienna, and not only during the festivals. The staffs of museums and theaters, sometimes complete orchestras, dress in such clothes. The Belvedere Palace is part of the Hofburg complex, where originals by Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raffaello, Dürer, and Goya can be seen. The palace has a unique collection of drawings, engravings, and miniatures. The exhibition of architectural designs also presents the works of the two Fischer von Erlachs. There's a rich caricature and poster collection. The catalog of the papyrus collection contains 100,000 entries, while the catalog of musical manuscripts and sheet music is of approximately the same size. The expression Hofburg comes from the words yard and fortress. Its etymology already suggests that it's not a single fortress, but a complex of palaces. The maze-like buildings, which were built in the course of approximately 800 years, contain 54 stairways, 26 corridors, and 19 inner courtyards. The number of rooms, halls, and other places is around 2,800. Obviously, the buildings of different ages represent different styles. The chapel is Gothic, the Swiss Gate and the Amelia Palace is Renaissance, the Chancellery Wing and the Winter Riding School are early Baroque, while the Michael Wing is late Baroque. The new Hofburg, built at the same time as the Ring, was already built in the Classicist style. According to historians, the first buildings were built around 1215, while the new Hofburg was finished around the beginning of World War I. Most of the tourists enter the castle through the Heroes' Gate. The great square they enter is Heldenplatz, the Heroes' Square. They are welcomed by the statue of the victor of Aspern, Archduke Charles of Austria. He also defeated Napoleon, yet enjoys no such fame as, for example, Admiral Wellington. In front of the National Library, we find the statue of Eugene de Savoy. He was the one who defeated the Turks and liberated Europe from the threat of the Ottomans. He, too, never received the recognition he would have deserved. Maybe a famous literary piece is missing about the Battle of Zenta. The pillars of the concave and the main facade are reminiscent of Italian Renaissance palaces. Originally, This oval square would have been closed with another wing, but this plan was upset by World War I and afterwards the Habsburg dethronement. The Hall of Ceremonies, where important congresses are held, is right at the Heroes' Square. The oldest part of the castle is the Swiss Court, named after the Swiss Guards. The Hungarian king used to live there when Vienna was captured by Matthias I for a short time. Queen Elizabeth, alias Sissi, lived in the Amalia Wing, named after the widow of Joseph I. Her former quarters are now a tourist display. On Sundays, the world-famous boys' choir, the Wiener Sängerknaben, sings in the Gothic chapel of the castle. Beneath the chapel is the treasury with the riches of the Habsburg family inside, the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, the sword of Charles the Great, coronation clothes and badges, and the famous salt cellar of Cellini. Along with many other buildings in Vienna, the Spanish riding school was designed by Fischer von Erlach the Younger. Charles VI established a stable in Lipica, now in Slovenia, with Andalusian and Arabian horses. This stable has a history of over 400 years, and this riding technique can only be seen in Andalusia and Vienna. The Parliament, resembling a Greek temple, was designed by Theophilus Hansen. The main facade and the wings are supported by Corinthian pillars with a tympanum above them. There's a bronze statue on the driveway of men holding wild horses back, observed by 4 Greek historians on the balustrade. Construction on the Burgtheater started in 1874, according to the designs of Semper and Hasenauer. The Royal Albert Hall of London was also Semper's work, so the two buildings show a certain similarity. When opened, the lighting of the theater was a real rarity. Its unique ventilating system brought in the scent of flowers from the nearby park, lilacs in the spring, roses in the summer. The neo-Gothic building of the City Hall was designed by Friedrich Schmidt around the end of the 1800s, according to the fashion of the time. The hall itself is still very striking. There's a knight standing on top of the almost 100-meter high tower. He is the Rathausmann, who can be found in the phone book under this address. The gallery of the Rathaus exhibits the paintings of mayors from the early Middle Ages. There are many exhibitions held in the hallways of the City Hall, while in front of it, many charity and sports events, as well as the Great Christmas Fair, are held. Just as in most German-speaking cities, the cellar of the City Hall, the Rathauskeller, is a well-known restaurant. The church in the park of the City Hall, the Votivkirche, is so gigantic that those unfamiliar with Vienna could think that they're standing in front of the St. Stephen's Cathedral. There was once an attempt to assassinate Emperor Franz Joseph I here. The brother of Emperor Maximilian vowed that if his brother stayed alive, he would build a church here. He didn't have to dig deeply into his pocket, since he asked the citizens to donate the money for the work, which soon began upon the design of Heinrich Ferstel. The founding stone was brought from the Gethsemane Garden. Although the Votivkirche, based on the plans of French cathedrals, was built hundreds of years after the Gothic period, it's one of the most beautiful churches of this style. The towers are 99 meters high and are protected by the patron saints of the monarchy. Anton Bruckner, whose neighbor was Stefan Zweig, composed his works on the organ of the church. The remains of Duke Niklas von Salm were brought to the Votivkirche from the Dorothea Church. In 1529, he was the general of the Imperial army protecting Vienna from the Turkish army. His statue stands in front of the temple in the Rathaus Park. The latest invention of the Viennese is the rentable bicycle. One can rent a bike at 50 places throughout the city, 24 hours a day. The first hour is free, and the following hours are not expensive either and can be paid by bank card. There's an extensive system of bicycle paths in Vienna, which connects all the important sites. Public transport is relatively quick and comfortable. Tourists are encouraged to buy a Vienna card, which offers free travel for 72 hours and reductions from the admission fees of 190 museums. Vienna is somewhat different than other European cities in the sense that the Danube only touches the northern part of the city. It was because of the regular floods that the city center was built somewhat further from the river. The inner city has only a canal, the Donau Canal, which was regulated in the 1870s. The inner boulevard, the Ring, surrounds the city center in the place of the old city wall. The walls, which served as an important defensive asset against the Turkish armies, were partly demolished by Napoleon. The malevolence backfired, since the locals realized how small and closed-in their city had been, so the rest of the wall was demolished by the citizens, only to build the Ring instead. The coaches pulled by only one horse are called flies. The ones pulled by two horses are called fiakers. In earlier times, mostly the latter version was used as a taxi. They still exist on the streets of Vienna. Nowadays they carry foreigners to show them around the city. There's even a museum about them, which shows the visitors the most beautiful pieces of the last 100 years. There's a legend, an interesting story or historical event connected to almost every house in the inner city. According to the story, there was a dragon living in the well of the Basilisk House. Its statue is now shown behind glass. There is a more than 100-year-old sycamore tree standing in the nearby garden, and the oldest acacia tree of Austria is in the courtyard of the Pallavicini Palace. The Renaissance Palace of the Palfi Dukes stands on Joseph's Square. The 6-year-old Mozart gave his first concert in this palace in 1762. The Clock Museum of Vienna, in the former palace of the leader of the militia, shows the visitors the story of measuring time since 1921. Here we may find the famous Nuremberg egg and pocket sundials as well as clocks that are built into these paintings here. The pocket watches and the singing clocks are exhibited in a different hall. The evolution of clocks is the evolution of artistic styles. There are neo-Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, Rococo, and Art Nouveau pieces here, as well as the avant-garde works of the Vienna workshop. The design of the clock of St. Stephen's Cathedral is also exhibited. There's one clock among the Baroque pieces which shows the zodiac signs, in addition to the movement of the Earth, the length of days and nights, and solar and lunar eclipses. The famous Anker clock is already outside the museum, but not far from it. The moving figures can be seen on the bridge connecting the two towers of the former insurance company. Every hour on the hour, a 3-meter-high historical figure made of copper appears on the dial. At noon, all of them can be seen at once. There are figures of Marcus Aurelius, Walter von der Vogelweide, Eugène de Savoy, Maria Theresa of Austria, and Haydn. There's a museum of Roman times keeping artifacts from the former Vindobona at the Hohermarkt. The Roman army invaded the Viennese basin in the 15th century and established a city called Vindobona at the crossing of the rivers Danube and Vienne. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, died of the plague here around 180. The Ruprecht Church, all covered with ivy, was built on the former place of a Roman watchtower around 740. Its name originates from Saint Ruprecht, the Archbishop of Salzburg, who was the patron saint of salt merchants. Judenplatz and Jugendgasse were the centers of the former Jewish district of Vienna. There was a 15th century house here, the Great Jordan, which was erected in place of a synagogue. Its neighbor is the former house of Vienna's greatest architect, Bernhard Fischer von Erlach. The Baroque palaces of Erlach are still vital parts of Vienna. Street names give the tourists a lot of information. There's a street for dyers, firemen, coal merchants, and soap makers. There are plaques on almost all houses, which usually commemorate the builders or the owners. The word Graben means ditch. The famous shopping street was originally a ditch. On the bank of this ditch lived the poor of the city, but later it also became a red light district. The statue of the Holy Trinity in the middle of the street commemorates the end of the plague. On the sign of an old restaurant is the famous Dear Augustine playing the bagpipes. His story is often told by the coachman, but can also be read at the restaurant. The Graben is now the center of the Gemütlich, the jovial Vienna. There are a lot of cafes here. Without them, this city would not be what it is today. They sell praline balls named after Mozart, and the cappuccino is equally good everywhere. The coat of arms of the Habsburg house on the signs of small restaurants and the term royal contractor reminds the visitor of the good old days. Café Schwarzenberg, which is still popular today, was also frequented by Emperor Francis Joseph. The Viennese people gladly pop in for a cup of coffee, to play chess, or to read the papers. There are countless versions of coffee with milk, cream, whipped cream, or ice cream. 1 month is not enough to taste them all. For the real gourmets, even a coffee bean roaster was put into use on the Schleifmühlgasse. The cafes also offer rolls, cakes, donuts, and Ischler cakes. The famous Sacher Hotel was the meeting point of the nobility of Europe. The owner, Madame Anna, asked the visitors to sign a white tablecloth, then she embroidered the signatures. The famous Sacher Torte, a cocoa-based pastry using a secret recipe with apricot jam and a chocolate coating, was also born here. Each European capital has a classy shopping street. In Vienna, this street is the Kärntner Street. This road, leading towards Carinthia, already existed in the time of Vindobona. The houses near the road were constantly being rebuilt and renovated in line with the current fashion. Therefore, there are some 21st century glass palaces among the Baroque ones. The most popular among them is the Gerngross House, which reflects the view of the St. Stephen's Cathedral in its windows. The dome was not named after the former Hungarian king, but after a martyr from Jerusalem who was stoned to death for his beliefs. This area was a cemetery at the time of the 1679 plague, and almost 100,000 people rest here. First, there was only a small Roman-style chapel in the middle of the cemetery, the remnants of which were found during a renovation in the 20th century. In 1258, a fire destroyed the building and only the base remained intact. The new church was built in 1304, but this time in Gothic style, which was made progressively bigger throughout the centuries. The foundation stone of the first tower was set in 1359, while almost 100 years later the building of the second tower was finished because the main builder, Master Hans Buschbaum, fell off the scaffolding. The pulpit, which is made of wood, is the work of Master Anton Pilgrim, who also immortalized himself among the statues of the cathedral. The red marble burial monument of Frederick III was carved for 30 years and was only finished because the client needed it. Among many famous historical persons, the historian Johannes Cuspinianus and the famous general Eugène de Savoy are also buried here. The gigantic bell was made from the copper cannons left here after the Turkish siege. The bell remained intact until the next siege. It was finally destroyed in 1945. The iron bar seen beside the entrance was the Viennese L, which was used by the customers to measure the length of cloth in order to check the accuracy of the merchants. Since the cathedral is made of sandstone, which doesn't tolerate pollution well, there's almost constantly scaffolding around the building. On the streets, jugglers, musicians, and artists entertain the passers-by. The Providence Well, which is an allegorical expression for the four rivers of Vienna, is a nice spot on the Neuer Markt Square. There's also a log on the corner of the Stock im Eisenplatz Square, which is famous for the fact that every wandering guild member has put a nail into it. Southeast from here, at the Himmelpfortgasse, stands the former cloister with the same name. According to legend, an elderly nun ran away and returned only 7 years later when she surfeited from carnal life. No one recognized her escape because every time she was supposed to have been on duty, the statue of Virgin Mary stepped down from the pedestal and did her duty instead of her. The statue is still under the gate. The Kunsthistorisches Museum, or the Museum of Art History, stands side by side with the Museum of Natural History on the Burgring. One can wander all day long in these two huge buildings. There are works from Dürer, Rembrandt, Rubens, Tintoretto, Veronese, Tiziano, and Velázquez here. Beside the gallery, there's an Egyptian collection, an ancient collection, and an exhibition of applied arts pieces. The most famous piece of the Museum of Natural History is the Venus of Willendorf, which was found not far from Vienna. The clay statue of a rounded womanly figure shows us that the feminine ideal of the ancient times was not at all similar to today's ideal. The park between the two buildings was named after Maria Theresa of Austria. There are 3 groups of statues, one of which functions as a fountain in the park, which is filled mostly with pine trees. The other group of statues depicts men who are trying to restrain some wild horses. This piece resembles the one standing in front of the Parliament. The monument of Maria Theresa was built upon 2 award-winning designs. The 20-meter-high work of Karl von Hasenauer and Karl von Zumbusch shows the Empress, similarly to her real life, surrounded by chancellors, advisors, and ministers, but there are generals and artists beside her as well. There's Chancellor Kaunitz, von Bartenstein, Antal Grasokovich, Liechtenstein, and the royal doctor von Swieten. Among musicians, Haydn and Mozart are represented. At the foot of the throne, the allegories of wisdom, power, justice, and patience complete the slightly overly ornamented monument. The block opposite the 2 museums is the Messepalast. The work of Fischer von Erlach was built to be a royal stable, but later it became a building for international fairs. Since 1975, fairs are held here in the Prater, so the palace has become the venue for various professional and artistic exhibitions. During the time of the change of regime in Eastern Europe, Maria Hilfer Street was the mecca of shopping tourists. There were small electronic shops and cheap grocery stores lining the street. The locals wanted them to disappear along with their memories, so nowadays one can only find incredibly expensive boutiques and shops. Maria Hilfer Street might even be classier than Kärntner Street, since its shops are much newer. After the hardships of the building of the subway, the surface has been renewed as well, and now it's full of small restaurants with balconies. There are tiny boutiques, drugstores, and shoe shops hidden among the large shops, but one can find delis, cozy cafes, and modern fast food chains as well. A marble statue of Haydn can be found in front of the church dedicated to the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. The composer lived in a nearby street, recently named after him, from 1793 until his death in 1809. His statue overlooks the people swarming at his feet from the height of the pedestal. Mainly at Easter or Christmas time, one can taste the flavors of the Austrian provinces. In wintertime, they offer mulled wine with the sausages, while in the spring they serve smoked or marinated ham with fresh fruit juice. There are a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. Austria is a strawberry and asparagus world power. A flower market in summertime gives the square a cheerful look with cut flowers and potted plants. The Naschmarkt has the same purpose. It's a food market, mostly vegetable and fruit market, with the current products of the season. The Karlskirche, the last work of the great architect Fischer von Erlach, which was finished by his son after his death, is the most important Baroque church of Austria. The church was commissioned by Charles VI to celebrate the passing of the plague and was named by the same person after the saint of the same name. The large dome, the two twisted pillars, and the portico resembling ancient Greek temples has a special effect on the visitor, especially now, after a renovation. It's worth it to take the lift and take a look at the beautiful frescoes of Johann Michael Rothmeier. The main altar is the work of Lorenzo Mattielli. The building with a large golden globe on top is the House of Secession, which was built in 1898 to represent and introduce this style to the public. The gilded, painted houses of the nearby square were also built in this style. The most famous masters of the Viennese Secession were Gustav Klimt, Joseph Olbricht, and Otto von Wagner. The green, Secession-style building designed by von Wagner used to be a subway stop. Later, it became a gallery and a café, which was named after the architect. The word secession means exodus. So, at the end of the 19th century, young artists who wanted something new left the artistic academies and established independent groups, which were more in touch with the directions of the age. The building of the Musikverein is a fortunate mixture of several styles. Its main hall is known worldwide thanks to television broadcasts made from here. The famous New Year's concerts are held here, which were conducted earlier by Clemens Krauss, Billy Boskowski, and Loren Maazel. This was the place where Arturo Toscanini, Gustav Mahler, Otto Klemperer, Richard Strauss, and Herbert von Karajan conducted the Vienna Philharmonic. The Gardekirche used to be a church belonging to the hospital standing beside it, but after the demolition of the hospital, it became the property of the Polish Guards. It received its name on that occasion, and 200 years later, it also received a statue of Pope John Paul II. The Belvedere Palace complex used to be the summer residence of Prince Eugène de Savoy. The nobleman who loved grandeur told his architects and sculptors to create a park with statues and fountains which unified all the beauty of the Italian Renaissance and French Baroque gardens. After his death, the new owner became Maria Theresa, who gave the place the name Belvedere, which is Italian for nice view. The engagement of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI of France was celebrated here with a huge masquerade. Later, Joseph II opened the lower Belvedere to the public, while Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne, lived in the upper Belvedere until 1914, when Gavrilo Princip prevented him from returning. After the fall of the monarchy, most of the halls became museums, but they also had conferences and political meetings here. In 1955, the Austrian State Treaty proclaiming the sovereignty of Austria was signed in the Marble Hall. The Baroque Museum of the Lower Belvedere is especially interesting. In the marble and mirror halls, there are reliefs and statues, as well as paintings from the greatest of the Baroque style, Rothmeyer, Johann Schmid of Krems, and Maulbertsch. The statues of the park were inspired by Greek mythology. The Museum of Medieval Austrian Arts was established in the former Winter Garden, the Orangerie. In Vienna, mostly those are able to see the Danube who arrive by boat or visit the island between the Danube and the Old Danube. There's a small train operating at the site of the 1964 World Fair, and there's a chairlift above it. Small boats depart from the dock. Some only sail within Vienna, but some of them sail to Wachau or even to Bratislava or Budapest. There's an old antique market on the riverbank. It's as if one were on the bank of the Seine, where many painters and graphic artists sell their works. Between April 1st and October 31st, boats departing from under the Schwedenbrücke show the city from a different point of view during a 3-hour trip. Those who would like another kind of view of the city could take a walk to the top of the tower of St. Stephen's Cathedral or the 252-meter Donauturm, or take a private flight from Schwechat Airport. The Orania is an observatory and a cultural center. It was built at the beginning of the 20th century based on plans by Max Fabiani. Primarily popular scientific lectures are held in its hall. The flea market, or Flohmarkt, has been a colorful spot in the city for a long time. Every Saturday, old books, prints, stamps, engravings, photos, discs, used products, and art objects are put on sale. It's not too difficult to find a Tonnet chair, a Secession lamp, a Venetian mirror, or real Altwein porcelain, maybe a Baroque musical clock. The late Friedensreich Hundertwasser was an architect, a graphic artist, a painter, and a philosopher. He was one of the most original individuals of his time. His unusual organic buildings were influenced by the works of Gaudi and the Viennese Secession. He concluded his studies at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, and during his travels he studied the architecture of Italy, France, Spain, and Morocco. In 1981, he became a professor, and in 1991 a museum exhibiting his works was opened. He died of a heart attack on board the ship Queen Elizabeth II. The architect, who was a devoted environmentalist, dressed the Vienna incinerator in his own unique style. The house where he lived can be found on the corner of Löwengasse and Kegelgasse. This house can only be viewed from the outside, while the permanent exhibition of the master can be seen nearby in the Kunsthaus Wien. Some say that houses are made of walls. "I think they're made of windows," said Hundertwasser, who despised straight lines since they don't exist in nature. His houses were always built from natural elements like bricks, tiles, and wood, and he always supervised the building in person. He spent most of his time on his boat, which was called Regentag, German for rainy day. He designed buildings for the Rosenberg restaurant chain, which are located on Austrian motorways. In Hundertwasser village, a complex of shops and restaurants, many souvenirs can be found which depict the works of the master, such as calendars, t-shirts, cups, file folders, caps, and who knows what else. The chapel of the Central Cemetery, which bears the name of a former mayor, Dr. Karl Lueger, is one of the most important works of the Austrian Secession. There are famous artists resting here, including many musicians and writers, such as Nestroy and Franz Werfel, for example, or Johann Strauss the Younger, Schubert, Franz von Suppé, Brahms, and Beethoven. The man lying beneath the brick marble is Austrian actor Kurt Jürgens, who was also famous in Hollywood in the 60s. The St. Mark's Cemetery is so old that people were buried here even during the 1452 plague. The gravestone of the greatest ever Austrian composer, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, can be found here. In the 14th century, there was a mill in the place of Schönbrunn Palace. The area was in possession of monks, but the emperor rented the place for hunting. Maximilian II fell in love with this place so much that he bought it and built a hunting castle on it. Later, the Turkish army burnt the palace, but a replacement was envisioned by Leopold I, who wanted a palace which would make Versailles fade in comparison. But the reality, for financial reasons, became more modest than the dream. The work of Fischer von Erlach was later modified by Maria Theresa through Nicolas Pacassi. The heavy, overly ornamented Baroque was replaced by graceful Rococo. The driveway, the outer stairs, the theater at the corner of the park, and everything that is worth looking at was built at that time. Schönbrunn became more and more important as time went by. Napoleon made it his headquarters, and later his son, the eaglet, died here. Maria Theresa liked it here, while Francis Joseph was born and died here as well. There are 1,441 rooms in the complex, but of course, not all of them can be visited. In the theater, where once the children of Maria Theresa played, classical music and opera concerts are held during the summer season. Visitors can reach the rooms of the castle by way of the blue staircase. One can take a look at the billiard room, the carousel room, the breakfast room, the mirror room, the Chinese cabinets, the porcelain room, and the Gobelin salon. The names speak for themselves. One can see the bedrooms of the Eaglet and Marie Antoinette, as well as the quarters of Maria Theresa, Francis Joseph, and Sissi. There's even a Sissi trip, which was chosen by journalists to be one of the 4 most beautiful trips on Earth. This leads through Bavaria and Italy to Austria and Hungary. Schönbrunn, of course, is an important stop on the trip. According to the creators, this is the only trip which passes the symbolic borders of the European Union through one historical person. Let's just add that the trip would be complete with a visit to the Achilleon Castle on Corfu. Schönbrunn Palace has a botanic garden, an orange orchard, and a zoo, which is especially liked by children. However, the new desert and rainforest pavilions should not be missed by adults either. The park, measuring 1 square kilometer, is full of sights. There are 40 marble statues and several fountains in it. Naturally, the Schönbrunn can also be seen, where a pavilion conceals the spring which gave its name to the palace. The main gate opens onto a garden with 2 fountains. One of them is the symbol of the eternal provinces, while the other is of the great rivers. The smaller wing connecting the gate buildings was the quarters of the guards. The royal coaches and sleighs, as well as harnesses, are shown in the buildings of the former stable and riding school. Of course, the flower beds are well taken care of and are full with red and white flowers, the national colors of Austria. One can find the Gloriette, which is a triumphal arch surrounded by pillars on top of a 327-meter-high hill. The monument commemorating the victory over the army of Frederick II of Prussia is open to the public between May and October. There's a good view from here, not only of the castle, but of the city as well. There are many interesting cultural attractions in the Grinzing district. One of them is the Lehar Schikaneder Castle, but there's also the Beethoven Grillparzer-house, commemorating its former owners, and of course the Villa Wertheimstein, which serves as a permanent exhibition of mountain trains and wine producing. However, tourists don't come here because of this. During Roman times, Emperor Probus ordered his men to cultivate grapes on the hills surrounding the city, since the wine was delivered to Vindobona from more distant areas. Later, after the Turkish army retreated, when the suburbs were rebuilt, small inns settled in the area of Grinzing, Nussdorf, and Heiligenstadt. The Heurigers are small inns in front of the wine cellars, where locals and tourists can sit down and talk about this year's wines. The symbol of the Heurigers is a pine tree branch hung above the door. Ralph Benatzky, Schubert, and Robert Stolz all lived here. It seems composers were influenced by the spirit of the place. In earlier times, an innkeeper could sell only bread and wine. The customers brought their own bacon, sausage, and other foods. Now they can select these from the self-service counter, while the wine is served by waiters. There's some restaurants in Grinzing where warm food is served as well, for example bouillon with small liver pieces or a real Wiener Schnitzel with potato salad. But one can also order the Tafelspitz, which is a rump roast cooked in a soup with horseradish or some kind of sauce. A local food is the veal with caraway seed, with cabbage and knödel. Knödel is the Austrian answer to the Czech dumpling and is eaten in a savory version as a side dish or sweet and filled as a dessert. Goulash is borrowed from the Hungarian cuisine, although the Viennese one is rather a stew than a soup. The fiaker goulash is eaten with fried eggs. A traditional Austrian food is the Bauernschmaus, the farmer's food, which contains trotters, fried bacon, and sausage with steamed cabbage. The roast beef with onion is perfect with beer or wine, as is the meat patty. Styria noodles are served with apricot salad on the side. All sorts of stewed fruits are popular here. The Salzburg noodle is a light dessert, while there's a food called Kaiserschmarrn that was named after, guess who, Kaiser Francis Joseph I. Music often accompanies the meals. The accordion player in the corner of the inn croons a traditional ballad to the city of Vienna. Vienna, Vienna, only you. The Höhenstrasse leads to the hills surrounding Grinzing. The old Kobenzel restaurant has been here since 1751, where you can take a good look at the city below. In Austria, not only the tradition of winemaking is strong, but also the tradition of brewing beer. While the wine drinkers go to the suburban Heurigers, the beer lovers visit the gardens of the Prater. Crispy fried leg of pork is served with the beer, which can be in half-liter or 1-liter steins. The city lies on the edge of the eastern end of the Alps in the Vienna basin. Vienna is surrounded by not too high hills, from where there's a good view of the capital city, but there are many towers within the city limits too. The most famous is the ferris-wheel in Prater, but there is also the Donauturm and the rotating restaurant of the Hochhaus. We can also recommend the balcony of the Südturm, the pillars of the Gloriette, and the Jubiläumswarte, which is a bit further away. The Prater is the island between the Danube and the Danube Canal, which used to be a royal hunting ground. International fairs have been held here since 1973. There are 2 race courses, 2 stadiums, a circus museum, and a planetarium here. The exhibition on the old amusement park is in the latter building. Historian Hans Pemmer first started to collect photographs, paintings, and writings about the Prater just for fun. Then he started to purchase old abandoned toys, so the collection soon overflowed the capacity of his house. In 1964, he donated his more than 7,000-piece collection to the city, which was finally exhibited in the planetarium. The amusement park itself has undergone a lot of changes. Basically, only the giant wheel of 61 meters in diameter and the atmosphere remained the same. All the other rides represent the technology of the 21st century. The Prater is one of the few amusement parks which is not transformed into Disney World-like theme parks. The owners luckily found a good mixture between tradition and modernism. There are shooting galleries and raffles, and if you get hungry, you can eat a giant pretzel or a langosch, a remnant of the monarchy which is popular not only in Hungary. In front of the beer counters, you can buy sausages and potatoes fried on an open fire, or chestnuts in the wintertime. The most intriguing section of the Austrian Danube, the Wachau, starts at Krems. The narrow valley, which is 33 kilometers long, is sometimes surrounded by 1,000-meter-high cliffs and sometimes rolling hills. The thick pine woods and lovely villages vary the scenery. There are castles, ruins, and monasteries peeking down on the tourists from the mountaintops and vineyards on the hills. Wachau is famous for its wines. Parallel to the river, there are old cellars in several rows. The grape harvest and the celebration afterwards are unforgettable to those visiting the place in autumn. The city of Krems, which lies at 220 meters, is the eastern entrance of the Austrian Danube Bend. All the mysteries of Lower Austria can be found in this city, located at the mouth of the river Krems. The city and the adjoining villages Und and Stein offer tourists several religious monuments. The most famous are the Transfiguration Temple and the nearby Benedictine Abbey, which was established by Bishop Altmann of Passau in 1074. The Baroque form of today was created by architect Lucas von Hildebrandt. The monastery has a 250,000-volume library, a gallery, a museum, and a treasury. Senftenberg Castle towers above the wood-covered hills of Krems, and the fort of Dürnstein, where Richard the Lionhearted was held captive in 1193, is only 4 kilometers away. One can see the section between Krems and Melk by boat, but there's also a nice bicycle path. Since the boats also transport bicycles, you can take the boat between Vienna and Krems and then go by bicycle from there. You can see almost the whole Austrian history during this trip. The Danube is bordered by the Dunkelsteiner Wald on the south and the steep cliffs of the Waldviertel on the north. Near Dürnstein, the river takes a large S-turn. There's a 16th century fort above the ferry docks at Rosatz. Weißenkirchen is a holiday resort as well as Rosatz. In medieval times, several large battles were fought here. The Gothic church was rebuilt to be a fortress upon hearing the news of the Battle of Mohács. The ruins of Hartenstein have been occupied only by bats, owls, and lizards for 300 years. The architectural style of Wachau can be best observed in Weißenkirchen and St. Michael. It's all about arches, bends, and intimate Renaissance inner gardens, thus providing endless material for photographers and graphic artists. This part of the river valley is the steepest and most thickly covered with woods, with the range of greens unbelievably wide. It's no surprise that poets, artists, and storytellers have immortalized this area. In the gallery of the village Mitterarnsdorf, the paintings of local artists are exhibited. According to archaeologists, once a Roman settlement stood here, while the nearby Spitz was established by the Celts. Spitz was called Wachen earlier, and the whole area was named after this settlement. Ruins of a fortress look down on the vineyards and cellars. This is Hinterhaus, once a fortress of the Kuhnring Knights. There's the Rotator, the Red Gate, the nicest lookout tower of the area, not far from here. There are 2 castles not far from this spot, which have remained unharmed. One is the village of Rana, the other one is Ottenschlag, where a friendly fort with 3 towers looks upon its own mirror image in a small lake. A small walkway leads from here to the Temple of Maria Lach. According to legend, the weathercock was invented in Schwalenbach. An evil knight wanted to submerge the castle of Agstein with the help of the devil, but a weathercock betrayed him. The knight used his bow on the cock, and since then, people have put cocks with an arrow in them on top of their houses, at least according to the locals. The castle of Agstein, despite the acts of the devil, still stands proud opposite of Willendorf on top of a hill. Willendorf is famous for the 1908 railway excavations. Scientists found an 11-centimeter, almost 10,000-year-old figurine of a woman, which can be seen as the Venus of Willendorf in the Natural History Museum of Vienna. Shortly before Melk is a ferry dock. There's a lonely church on the riverbank and a fort on the cliff of Schönbrunn with round bastions, stout towers, and a beautiful gate. Melk is a pleasant little town. Its main site is the Benedictine Abbey and its church. The Baroque building complex on top of a 60-meter hill with the 2-towered church and the semicircle balcony is an unforgettable sight. Many people call it the Austrian Escorial. The Babenbergs built a fortress and a monastery here around 1000 on the place of former forts. The monastery was fortified in medieval times. Its final form was set during the 18th century, thanks to Jakob Prantauer. The monastery is famous for its gallery, archives, and 80,000-volume library. The main character of Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, Azzo of Melk, also started his journey here. In the wine cellar, one can taste the famous wines of the abbey. There was a Roman fort standing in the place of the settlement around 400. The 10th century, it was the western edge of the Hungarian country, but later it was given to Leopold I by the leader of the Huns, so it became the eastern castle of the Babenbergs. An Irish prince, traveling to the Holy Land, was killed here by mistake. Later, he was declared a saint and buried in the monastery. Napoleon was also here in 1805 and 1809. In the city, one can take a walk to the river past Renaissance and Baroque houses. There's Mauer by Melk to the east of the center of Melk on the slopes of the Dunkelsteiner Wald. The wooden altar of the Gothic church from 1515 is the most important work of this kind from Lower Austria. The altar was prepared based on the graphics of Dürer. On the main square, there's a well named after the Irish prince who became a saint. The House of the Post is one of the oldest buildings in Lower Austria. In front of it, the roads from Vienna, Linz, and Krems join. The city is the western end of Wachau and a starting point of many nice trips. One can buy Austrian specialties, fruits, and liqueurs in this nice little city. The romantic valley and the Abbey of Melk are two of the most beautiful landscapes one will remember about Austria.